Greetings, welcome to another edition of Railroad in Time, the series that looks at the more unusual aspects of the railways in Britain and further underworld. This time the train of time has brought us to the 100 of Manford, a peninsula just south of Chichester in West Sussex. Here we're going to look at the 100 of Manford and Selsey Tramway, or as it was better known as the Selsey Tram, or possibly the Siddlesham Snail, but we'll talk about that a bit later. So remember, as we alight the train, make sure the doors are closed, mind the gap as we get off of the train station, and let's enjoy this delve into the history of the 100 of Manford and the Selsey Tramway. The reasons for building the Selsey Tram were similar to that of the Ryan-Canberra Railway. A video can be found on the Railroad in Time channel page. I'll link it in the description below. Selsey is based at the end of the peninsula, about 8 miles away from Chichester, and is a quiet seaside town that has certain attraction for visitors with golden beaches. One problem though, like with the Ryan-Canberra, it was the difficulty getting there. Just 8 miles north was a major rail station of the London, Brighton and South Coast Railway, Chichester. However, to get there, as we said, it's very difficult. Seeing what happened to Bognor when they built a branch line from Barnham, just a few miles down the road from Chichester, down to Bognor, the people of Selsey thought that they could get in on this action too. It would also help the local farmers, as you can imagine, because they can get their crops up to Chichester, a major market town, and get a better price for them. Ideas for having the railway had come from the very start when Chichester itself had become established around about 1846, but it would take another 3 decades before anything was going to be done about it. In 1887, Messrs Frederick Crafton and Charles Cranford applied to the government for an application of an Act for the Selsey Railway and Pier in 1888, but this was to go no further than the planning application, possibly because of the estimated price tag, which would be £75,000 or around about 8.5 million today. This was just too much for any small town to take on. The idea was left hanging. Things would change with the release of the Light Railways Act in 1896. This act was brought in by the government to enable places such as Selsey, these small towns, to be able to afford a railway down to their place and be able to cash in or link into the current network of railways. The trains, however, they'd have to be lighter, a speed limit was imposed, all this so it could warrant these lower building costs. The proposers of the railway would also not have to undergo the rigmarole of actually gaining an Act of Parliament in order to build their railway. They'd just have to go through the Board of Transport. This saved money in its own way. To build a railway and get an Act of Parliament, you obviously had to provide money, get solicitors, all these sort of people involved, possibly bribe MPs, the local landowners and stuff like that, not to put a block on your railway. So it would all cost money before they actually started getting the rails on the ground. As it turned out, they didn't use this act, they used another act enabled them to get it done. The Railway Construction Facilities Act of 1864. This means, just like the Ryan-Canberra that we talked about before, it would be designated a tramway rather than a railway. This would save even more money by negating the need for level crossings and proper signalling. This decision would affect the railway later. Work started on the railway in May 1897, and by August of that year it was complete enough to open to the public. One interesting story of the construction of the tramway was that the locomotive being used during the construction, the Chichester, was needed on the other side of the Chichester Canal. Unfortunately, the rails hadn't been built over the canal at that time, so they need to cross it by using the road. What they decided to do to facilitate this, they got a traction engine from one of the local farmers and it pulled the loco along the road to get it onto the other side of the canal. And just so it didn't damage the road by doing this, they laid rails in front of it, so they would pull it onto one set of rails, move the next set in front and pull the locomotive forward a bit further. A bit like you would have seen Norse boats and other boats being pushed along, except in that sort of way. On the 27th of August 1897, the line was opened, and in attendance were the great and good of Chichester and Selsey. The fact that the latter needed to be brought to Chichester using the tramway could have been a reason why the ceremony started nearly an hour late. This, as you can imagine, did not go well with the assembled press. The Chichester Observer wondered if the patience was nearly exhausted. The West Sussex Gazette also made comments on how it caught the complaint of unpunctuality from its neighbour, referring to the Bognor branch line. But begin it did, and on the 31st of August, the tone of Chichester Observer had changed. Their report that day described it as a monumentous event, with signs of pleasure and delight being abundant. They described how the railway from Chichester through the important agricultural land to the growing seaside resort of Selsey is greatly needed. The line was very popular and it received a lot of use. At times, the little line was transporting up to 80,000 passengers a year. Things were doing so well that there was an application made by Mr. Henry Bellman for a full licence to go with erecting a hotel near the station of Selsey. So obviously he could see that money was coming in and he wanted a bit of that himself, understandably. As the years went by, up to the start of the First World War, more trains were added to the timetable, again indicating how well the line is doing. Well, I say there was a timetable, it was more of a set of guidelines. But there were, like many such railways around the country, it was built in heavy agricultural areas such as the Hundred and Manhood. It was not uncommon for the guard to leave the train at times to go and see the local farmer and see if they had anything that they needed collecting for the next day. There are also stories of the train stopping in the summer to allow the passengers to pick blackberries. There is even a story of a driver that, knowing a young gentleman in one of the villages was needed to go into London that day, noticed that he wasn't at the station. So, as most drivers would do, they'd go, oh well, another train a bit later, he can catch that. No, being conscientious as he was, he stopped the train, walked down the road, knocked for the young gentleman and told him that the train was waiting for him, and then took him on off to Chichester, where presumably he caught his train to London on time. There are so many stories like this for the line. Alongside of this, the locomotives and the track and the rolling stock was not as best as it could be, meaning there were many delays on the line, so much that it attracted the attention of a political satirist known as Cynicus, who created one or two postcards about it. They had a general theme of a railway that was only used if the person had the time to waste. Like many railways, the aftermath of the First World War was a time of decline for the Selsey tram. This was not helped by a flood which happened at Pagan Harbour, which flooded the railway, and once the waters had died down, the Selsey tram had to spend vast amounts of money in order to raise the railway up another around about 10 foot, which would then allow the trains to be able to carry on and not be affected by any further floods. Going into the First World War, this seriously affected the profits of the railway. The war itself would have had a great effect on the railway, many workers signing up to fight at the front with a show of patriotism. This meant there would be fewer working on the railway to keep up with maintenance and running the trains. The engines and the rolling stock on the line already tired. Many of the engines that were running the line at this time were fourth hand and etc, and much of the rolling stock was coming to the end of its time. As well as the practical aspects of having less hands to do the maintenance and run the line, there was also the fact that money wouldn't buy as much during the war. Inflation rose but dramatically during this time, meaning there was less spending power. Also, at the end of the First World War, the roads were made a big surgence, and this proved to be hard for the Selsey Tramway to fight. From 1919 to 1933, on the Hundred and Manhood and Selsey Tramway, the receipts went from £3,912 per year down to just 427. There were plans to try and avert the decline of the railway. One thing they did was they changed the name of the railway and its status to a proper railway, and they changed it to the West Sussex Railway Tramway section. It had been suggested this was to help convince the Southern Railway to incorporate them into its new empire after the Railways Amalgamation Act of 1921. Just as it happened much earlier with the Bognor line, which is still running today. There are conflicting views as to why Southern Railway did not incorporate them. Some say that it was Southern themselves that were not interested. The cost of upgrading the line to put proper signalling in, make level crossings, rebuild the line would have just been too much for them to take on. Others say that it was actually the railway engineer himself, Colonel Holbein Stevens. Again, we saw him back in the Ryan Canberra Railway. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. Perhaps we should convince the Train of Time to have a look at Holbein himself. He seems to be playing quite prominently at the moment. But anyhow, on with the story. He was an advocate of the light railways and saw them as the future. So it's possibly him that convinced Southern Railways not to take the 100 manhood on. We'll never know for sure until someone actually finds that one bit of evidence. In order to try and cut down on the costs, Holbein Stevens introduced rail cars in 1924. These may have worked on a better built line, but as I said, the maintenance on the line was terrible. It was very rickety, very undulating, and it was not in the best condition. The lack of suspension and the solid metal wheels going along with this, you can see what sort of ride it had. And it actually got its own little nickname of the old bumpety bump. Gives you some clue what the ride would have been like. Finally, there was also interest from another railway that was soon to become the Romley Hythe and Dymchurch Railway. But again, this was mooted due to the cost of upgrading the line to be able to take it. Despite all this effort to keep the line going, unfortunately, in January 1935, the line went into receivership. After 38 years of running, the Selsey tram was no more. So what's left of the tramway today? Not a lot. These sort of light railways were known as hedgerow railways. They didn't buy the land like the major railways did. They got an agreement from the farmers to use their land. They're often called hedgerow railways because they brought the line so close to the hedgerows. So all that happened when the Selsey tramway closed, the rent wasn't paid, the line was ripped up, and they went and ploughed it again. But it's not all gone. In fact, there is a walk that has been created that follows the line as best it can. Thanks to volunteers and the route itself being so charismatic in the hearts of the local populace, they've made a pathway which follows the Selsey tramway and tells you various parts all there. So if you're ever in the area, give it a go, give it a walk down and see what it's like. The 100 manhood and Selsey tramway may be gone, but its impact stays on, just like all the other railways. They never die fully. It's always still there in the hearts and memories of those. And that's a testament to that is the work of the volunteers in the area that rebuilt and maintain the walkway that takes you down there. And it shows how vital these small railways were to the rural life of the areas. Yes, they may not have lasted a long time, but they were valuable assets to the local people. If you're enjoying this look at the lesser known railways of Britain, don't forget to like and subscribe and share your own memories or stories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all on board the Train of Time and another story of the railways.